My name is Vanessa Pruitt. I'm 38 years old. 4 months ago, I was sitting in my psychiatrist's office for what I thought was a routine medication review when she slid a manila folder across her desk and said, "Vanessa, there's something you need to see before we go any further." Inside the folder were intake forms. My intake forms, from when I had first come to her practice 6 years ago. Standard paperwork. Personal history, family background, presenting symptoms. Except someone had filled out a supplemental family history form that I had never seen before. In handwriting I recognized immediately. My mother's. She had contacted my psychiatrist's office 2 weeks after I started treatment. She had submitted 7 pages, 7 handwritten pages, describing my history, my behavior, my character. Words like unstable, delusional, difficult, a pattern of fabrication going back to childhood. She had done it without my knowledge, without my consent. And she had been doing something very similar, my psychiatrist explained carefully, with nearly every person in my extended family for over a decade. I looked at those 7 pages for a long time, and then something shifted in my chest. Not broke, not shattered, but settled. Like a picture frame finally level on a wall after years of being slightly wrong. Before I tell you what I did with that folder, please like and subscribe. But only if this story is landing somewhere real for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely love knowing you're out there. Let me take you back, because those 7 pages didn't come from nowhere. They came from 12 years of something I didn't have a name for until I was sitting in that office with a psychiatrist who finally gave me one. Growing up in Tallahassee, Florida, I learned early that the story my mother told about me was not the same as the story I was living. In her version, I was always the problem. In mine, I was always trying to figure out what I had done wrong. My family, plainly. Dad was an electrician who worked long hours and loved us in a practical, hands-off way that left most of the emotional architecture of our home entirely to my mother. My younger sister Renata was soft-spoken and agreeable and gave my mother very little to work with in terms of conflict. And my mother was intelligent, warm to outsiders, and an expert at narrative. She could walk into any room and tell a story about any person in it that would make you believe her completely. The story she told most often and most convincingly was about me. When I was 13, I was struggling in school. Not failing, but inconsistent. Some subjects brilliant, others impossible. A teacher noticed and suggested I be evaluated for a learning difference. My mother told the counselor in front of me that I had always been dramatic and that I preferred excuses to effort. The evaluation never happened. I told myself the teacher was wrong. I worked harder. I stayed quiet. When I was 17, I had my first experience with what I now know was a depressive episode. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating much, stopped wanting to be around people. I told my mother I thought something was wrong with me, that I needed help. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Vanessa, you have always had a flair for the theatrical. Not everything needs to be a crisis." Then she called my Aunt Linda that same evening. I heard the conversation from my bedroom and told her that I was going through a phase and being very difficult and that she was exhausted from managing me. I didn't ask for help again for 11 years. I told myself I was fine. I got very good at performing fine. By the time I was 24, I had a college degree and a job in healthcare administration and an apartment of my own and a life that looked, from the outside, like evidence that my mother had been right all along, that there had never been anything actually wrong, that I had just needed to grow up and stop being dramatic. But I knew what was underneath. I had always known. And every time I surfaced enough to try to reach toward something, a therapist, a doctor, a conversation with a family member, my mother had already been there, already preparing the ground. My Aunt Linda, who I had always been close to, started pulling back when I was in my mid-20s. I noticed it gradually. Shorter calls, careful responses, a certain guardedness that hadn't been there before. When I finally asked her directly what had changed, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "I just worry about you, Vanessa. Your mother says you've been struggling a lot, that you have a tendency to see things that aren't there." I had not told my mother I was struggling. I hadn't spoken to her more than twice that year. My cousin Derek stopped inviting me to family gatherings around the same time. My grandmother, my mother's mother, began treating me with a careful distance, like I was something fragile that might behave unpredictably. At a family Christmas when I was 27, I watched my mother work the room and caught the looks people gave me when they thought I wasn't watching. Concerned, cautious, the specific expression people wear around someone they've been told is troubled. I drove home that Christmas night and sat in my parking lot for an hour. I want to be clear about something. I do have a mental health history. I have been treated for depression and an anxiety disorder, both of which are real, both of which are manageable, both of which have absolutely nothing to do with my credibility or my character. I am not telling you this story as someone who had nothing wrong. I am telling you as someone who had real things that needed real help, and whose mother used those real things as a weapon against her for 12 years. There is a difference. It took me a long time to see it clearly enough to say it out loud. I finally found my psychiatrist, Dr. Adeze Okafor, when I was 32. A colleague at work had mentioned her name and something about the way she was described, direct, rigorous, not interested in performing wellness, made me make the appointment. I walked into her office fully prepared to be told I was dramatic. I had been conditioned to expect it. She did not tell me that. What she told me, over many months of careful work, was that I had significant untreated depression that had been present since adolescence, an anxiety disorder that had been compensated for through rigid self-control, and a complicated relationship with self-advocacy that looked a lot like what happens when someone spends years being told that their perceptions cannot be trusted. I cried in her office more times than I can count, not because things were hopeless, because they weren't, and that was somehow harder to absorb than hopeless would have been. Dr. Okafor is a mandated reporter and a meticulous record keeper. 6 years into our work together, she had flagged something she'd been holding carefully, the family history document my mother had submitted at the start of my treatment. She had not used it clinically. She had not found it credible. But she had kept it because documentation is documentation, and she had reached a point where she believed I was stable and strong enough to see it and make my own decisions about what to do with it. She was right about the timing. I read all 7 pages in her office. My mother had described me as having a history of false accusations, unstable relationships, an inability to accept responsibility, and delusional thinking. She had framed my first depressive episode at 17 as an attempt to manipulate the family. She had described my decision to seek therapy in my 30s as evidence of instability rather than health. She had signed the letter with her full name and included her phone number, inviting Dr. Okafor to call her to discuss my case. Dr. Okafor had not called her. I sat with those pages and felt the 12 years of family dinners where I'd been watched sideways. The aunt who pulled away, the grandmother's careful distance, the cousin who stopped calling. My mother's voice on the phone after every family event, checking in, sounding concerned, asking how I was really doing in a tone that managed to suggest she already knew the answer and it wasn't good. She had been doing this systematically, methodically, for over a decade. I left Dr. Okafor's office with a copy of the document, a clear treatment summary of the last 6 years, and a letter on clinic letterhead describing my diagnosis, my progress, and my prognosis. Dr. Okafor had offered to write it. She said she'd been waiting for a reason. I called my friend Simone from the parking lot. Simone and I have been friends since college. She is a social worker. She has known about my family situation for years, and she is the person I call when I need someone who will tell me the truth and then help me figure out what to do with it. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had just read. I read her sections of it over the phone. When I finished, Simone said, "Vanessa, what your mother did is not a difference of opinion about who you are. What she did is a coordinated, years-long campaign to undermine your credibility with everyone who might have supported you. I need you to hear that clearly." I heard it clearly. We talked for an hour about what I wanted to do. Not what I should do, not what was strategic. What I actually wanted, which is a question I had not been asked enough in my life. What I wanted was for my family to know the truth. Not to punish my mother, not to blow anything up, but because I had been living inside a story someone else had written about me for 12 years, and I was tired of it. And I had documentation now, and I was 38 years old, and I was done being the version of Vanessa that my mother had invented. I organized what I had. the 7-page letter my mother had submitted, Dr. Okafor's 6-year treatment summary, the clinic letter, a timeline I put together myself, matching my mother's documented communications with family members' behavioral shifts toward me. Aunt Linda's withdrawal in 2018, Derek's distance in 2019, my grandmother's changed demeanor that same year. The numbers, when I laid them out: 12 years of active narrative management, 7 pages submitted to my psychiatric provider without my knowledge or consent. At least 6 family members whose relationships with me had been measurably affected. 3 documented instances of my mother contacting people in my life: my psychiatrist, my former employer's HR department in 2016 for reasons I was never fully told, and my landlord in 2019 when I renewed my lease, to share concerns about my mental health. I did not know about the employer contact or the landlord until I started making calls. My former HR director, when I reached out, confirmed that my mother had called expressing worry about my stability. My landlord at the time remembered the call but had ignored it. I had wondered for years why my lease renewal that year had been delayed by 3 weeks. I arranged a family dinner. I told my Aunt Linda I needed her there, and I told her it was important, and something in my voice must have told her this was different, because she said yes without asking why. The dinner was at Denise's house, my cousin on my father's side, who had stayed consistently close to me over the years, and who already understood more of this than most. 8 people total: my Aunt Linda, my cousin Derek, my grandmother, 2 of my mother's siblings who had always been kind to me and whom I believed deserved to know the truth, my mother, and me. My mother did not know what the dinner was about. She thought it was a birthday gathering for my grandmother. It was also that. After dinner, after cake, I asked if I could say something. My voice was steady. I had practiced enough that I trusted it. I told them, calmly, that for the past several years I had been aware that information about my mental health had been shared with members of the family in ways that had affected those relationships. I told them I had recently obtained documentation that helped me understand the source and scope of what had been shared. I told them I was not there to create conflict, but to be honest, because honesty was the only thing that had ever actually helped me. Then I put Dr. Okafor's letter on the table, the treatment summary, a 1-page version of the timeline. I did not put the 7-page letter on the table. I had decided that was between my mother and me. Some truths are for everyone. Some are for the people directly involved. My Aunt Linda picked up the treatment summary first. She read it quietly. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I pulled away from you," she said. "I thought I was protecting you by not pushing. I didn't know I was just leaving you alone." Derek said, "I owe you an apology. I should have asked you directly instead of just taking distance as easier." My grandmother said nothing for a long time. She is 81 and she has seen enough of life to know when something has been wrong under her nose and she missed it. That kind of recognition is its own kind of pain, and I did not want to add to it. My mother sat very still. She didn't look at the documents. She looked at the table. One of her sisters said, "Patricia, what is this?" My mother said she had only ever been trying to make sure people knew how to help me, that she had been worried, that she had done what she thought was right. I said, "You contacted my psychiatrist, my landlord, my employer, without my knowledge, for 12 years. She said, "I was scared for you." I said, "I know you were, and I think somewhere in there that was real. But scared for someone and controlling the story about them are 2 different things, and you have done the second one for a very long time." The room stayed quiet. Nobody argued with me. That was 4 months ago. Aunt Linda and I have spoken every 2 weeks since that dinner. Real conversations. She asks about my work, I ask about hers, and sometimes we talk about the years that were lost, and we do it without flinching. It's not fixed. It's being rebuilt, which is slower and more honest than fixed. Derek texted me a week after the dinner and said he was sorry. Just that. 2 words. I wrote back and said thank you and meant it completely. My mother and I have not spoken since that night. I have not closed the door permanently. I don't think that serves either of us. But I have told her through a letter, drafted with Simone's help, that any future relationship between us requires her acknowledgement of what she did and a commitment to stopping it. She has not responded yet. I see Dr. Okafor every 3 weeks. I am on a medication regimen that took 4 years to calibrate correctly, and that has given me a version of daily life I genuinely did not know was available to me. I sleep, I eat, I make plans and follow through on them, and feel the satisfaction of that like something ordinary, which it is, which I had just never been allowed to have before. I am not a troubled woman. I am a woman who had real things that needed real help, who asked for that help in the face of significant opposition, and who spent 12 years being the villain in a story she hadn't written and couldn't fully read until a psychiatrist put a folder on a desk and trusted her to handle it. I handled it. If you are someone who has been told, repeatedly and by someone who loves you, that your perception of your own life cannot be trusted, I need you to hear this. The fact that someone is worried about you does not give them the right to speak for you. The fact that you have struggled does not make you a story someone else gets to tell. You are allowed to be complicated and still be believed. You are allowed to have a history and still be the most reliable narrator of your own life. Find your Dr. Okafor. Find your Simone. Find the one person who will read the document with you and tell you the truth and sit with you in the parking lot afterward while you figure out what to do next. You are not what they said about you. Please like and subscribe if this found you when you needed it. Leave me a comment. Tell me if you've ever had your own story told back to you in a way you didn't recognize. Tell me if you've ever had someone hand you a piece of paper that explained years of confusion in a single read. I want to hear you. I have always been able to hear you. My name is Vanessa Pruitt. I'm 38 years old, and the file on my psychiatrist's desk says I'm doing remarkably well.